What would happen if Canada turned off the lights? Not a metaphor, literally, the lights. 60% of America's electricity imports come from one country. Hydro-Quebec powers New York, powers New England, powers Michigan. One decision in Ottawa, and 20 million Americans are in the dark. Last month, Trump called Mark Carney governor of the 51st state. He threatened 100% tariffs. He revoked Canada's invitation to the Board of Peace, and Carney backed down. Everyone said Canada folded. I said Canada folded, but I was only telling you half the story. Because while Trump was winning headlines, Canada was sitting on something America cannot tariff, cannot sanction, and cannot replace. Not in 1 year, not in 5, maybe not ever. This is the story of the resources America pretends it doesn't need, the leverage Canada hasn't had to use yet, and why the real negotiation hasn't even started. Let me tell you what America saw last month. They saw Mark Carney, the Prime Minister of Canada, fold. They saw him abandon a trade deal with China within 48 hours of Donald Trump threatening 100% tariffs. They saw the President of the United States call Carney governor of the 51st state. They saw Canada's invitation to the Board of Peace revoked. They saw a country bend, and America celebrated. The headlines wrote themselves, "Trump wins trade war before it starts. Canada backs down. Carney caves." Every cable news network, every political commentator, every analyst with a Twitter account declared the same thing. America had won. Canada had surrendered. I said the same thing. In my last video, I told you Canada folded, and they did. But here's what I didn't tell you. Here's what nobody told you. Because while everyone was watching Mark Carney bow his head at the podium, nobody was watching what Canada was sitting on. Nobody was asking a simple question. What does America actually need from Canada? Not what America wants, not what America prefers, what America needs, what America cannot function without. And that's where this story gets interesting. See, there's a difference between winning a battle and winning a war. There's a difference between a headline and a strategy. And there's a difference between political leverage and structural leverage. Political leverage is what Trump used. It's tariffs, it's threats, it's pressure applied to a moment designed to force a decision. It works in the short term. Carney made a choice. He chose not to escalate. He chose not to test whether Trump would actually follow through on 100% tariffs. He chose survival over spectacle. But structural leverage? That's different. Structural leverage isn't about what you say. It's about what you have. It's about geography. It's about resources. It's about the things that exist whether or not anyone acknowledges them. And Canada has structural leverage that no tariff can touch. Let me explain. Right now, as you're watching this video, there are transmission lines running from Quebec into New York. There are transmission lines running from Quebec into New England. There are transmission lines running from Ontario into Michigan, into Minnesota. Electricity flows across that border every single day, every single hour, keeping American lights on, keeping American factories running, keeping American hospitals powered. In 2022, Quebec alone exported over 22 terawatt hours of electricity into the United States. Hydro-Quebec operates over 34,000 kilometers of transmission lines. 15 interconnections link Quebec's grid to grids in Ontario, the Maritimes, and, most importantly, the American Northeast. New England and New York have historically received up to 60% of America's total electricity imports from Canada. During peak demand, summer heat waves, winter cold snaps, Canadian hydropower isn't a nice to have. It's essential infrastructure. Now, I should be precise here. In the last 2 years, drought conditions in Western Canada reduced hydroelectric output. Trade patterns shifted slightly. The numbers have fluctuated. But the infrastructure? The infrastructure hasn't moved. The transmission lines are still there. The dams are still there. The generating capacity, over 37 gigawatts in Quebec alone, is still there. You can have a bad year for rain. You cannot relocate geography, and that's just electricity. Let's talk about oil. Canada exported an average of 4.2 million barrels of crude oil per day in 2024. That's not a typo. 4.2 million barrels every single day. And here's the part that matters. Canada is America's largest foreign oil supplier. Not Saudi Arabia, not Mexico, not Venezuela. Canada. 60% of all crude oil imported into the United States comes from one country. The country Trump just called the 51st state. The next largest supplier? Mexico, at roughly 7%. Canada supplies 9 times more oil to America than the next competitor. And it's not just about volume, it's about compatibility. American refineries, especially in the Midwest and the Gulf Coast, were built to process heavy crude oil. They were designed for it. They were optimized for it. And the largest source of heavy crude accessible to American refiners isn't in Texas. It isn't in the Permian Basin. It's in Alberta. It's the oil sands, it's Western Canadian Select. The pipelines already exist, the Keystone system, the Enbridge network, billions of dollars of infrastructure connecting Canadian oil fields to American refineries, infrastructure that took decades to build, infrastructure that cannot be replaced with a phone call or a new trade deal. In 2024, 63% of Canadian oil exports to America went to PADD2. That's the Midwest. Places like Whiting, Indiana, where BP operates one of the largest refineries in North America. A refinery specifically configured to run on Canadian heavy crude. You don't just switch that to light sweet crude from the Permian. You rebuild. You spend billions. You wait years. Trump can tariff Canadian oil. He already has 10% as of March 2025. But here's what the tariff does. It makes American consumers pay more. It makes American refiners pay more. It does not, and this is critical, it does not create an alternative supply, because there is no alternative supply. Not at that volume, not with that infrastructure, not with that compatibility. This is the difference between political leverage and structural leverage. Political leverage won the press conference. Carney backed down. The China deal collapsed. The headlines favored Trump. But structural leverage hasn't moved. The electricity still flows. The oil still flows. The pipelines still connect. The refineries still depend. And here's what makes this more interesting. When Carney folded on China, everyone assumed that was the end of Canada's negotiating position. They assumed that Canada had shown weakness, and weakness invites more pressure. And in politics, that's often true. But economics doesn't work like politics. In politics, perception matters. Looking strong matters. The narrative matters. In economics, only one thing matters. What do you have that the other side needs? And what Canada has is a resource portfolio that America cannot replicate domestically. Not quickly, not cheaply, not without massive disruption. Oil, electricity, and there's more. We'll get to uranium, potash, critical minerals, resources. America needs for national security, for food production, for the energy transition itself. Trump's tariffs are real. They're costing real money. They're changing real behavior. But tariffs are a tax, and a tax can be absorbed. A tax can be passed on to consumers. A tax can be negotiated. What cannot be negotiated is geography. What cannot be negotiated is geology. What cannot be negotiated is the fact that the largest source of critical resources on America's border speaks English, shares a legal system, and has zero interest in watching America fail. Canada folded on a press conference. Canada has not folded on physics. And that's what this story is actually about. Because over the next several minutes, I'm going to show you exactly what America imports from Canada that it cannot replace. Not the cars, those can be made elsewhere. Not the lumber, that can be sourced elsewhere. The things that are fixed, the things that are structural, the things that exist because of where Canada is, not because of what Canada chooses. I'm going to show you why Trump's tariff victory might be the most expensive headline in American economic history. And I'm going to show you what happens when a country stops fighting the battle its opponent wants to fight and starts fighting the war it's actually positioned to win. Because Mark Carney didn't get to be governor of the Bank of Canada and then governor of the Bank of England by accident. He didn't become a managing director at Goldman Sachs by accident. He understands something about negotiation that most politicians don't. Sometimes the winning move is to let your opponent think they've won. Carney gave Trump a headline. He did not give Trump the resources. And in 6 months, July 2026, there's a review coming. CUSMA, the trade agreement that governs everything between the United States, Mexico, and Canada. That's when the real negotiation happens. That's when the real cards get played. What Trump got in January was applause. What Canada kept in January was leverage. And that's the story nobody's telling. Let me take you through a list. Not theories, not projections, not what might happen in some distant future. I'm talking about what exists right now. What flows across that border every single day. What America depends on, structurally, physically, irreversibly. And let's start with the one that matters most in this moment. Rare earth minerals. If you don't know what rare earths are, you need to understand them, because they're about to become the most important materials on the planet. Rare earth elements are 17 metals with names most people can't pronounce. Neodymium, praseodymium, dysprosium, terbium. They're used to make permanent magnets, the kind that go into electric vehicle motors, wind turbines, fighter jets, guided missiles, smartphones, and data centers. And here's the problem. China controls them. 90% of all rare earth processing happens in China. 94% of all permanent magnets, the actual finished product, come from Chinese factories. America has known this was a vulnerability for years. They've talked about it, they've studied it, they've written reports. And then, in April 2025, China did something about it. The Chinese Ministry of Commerce imposed export restrictions on 7 rare earth elements, the exact ones America needs for defense and advanced manufacturing. This wasn't theoretical, this was real. Shipments dropped, prices tripled. European buyers saw costs jump to 6 times what Chinese domestic customers paid. By May 2025, rare earth magnet exports from China to the United States had fallen by 93%. American manufacturers started shutting down production lines. Defense contractors scrambled for alternatives that didn't exist. And then, in October 2025, China escalated again. They expanded restrictions to 12 rare earth elements. They applied something called the Foreign Direct Product Rule. The same mechanism America used against Chinese semiconductors now turned around. Starting December 2025, any company affiliated with a foreign military, including the United States military, would be denied export licenses. Any request to use rare earths for military purposes would be automatically rejected. America's defense industrial base was suddenly staring at a supply chain that could be cut off at Beijing's discretion. So where does America turn? There's only one answer that matters: Canada. In Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, there's a facility that most Americans have never heard of: the Saskatchewan Research Council's Rare Earth Processing Facility. It's not large by Chinese standards, but it's real, and it's operational. In summer 2024, months before China's export restrictions, this facility became the first in North America to produce rare earth metals at commercial scale. Not pilot scale, commercial scale. Neodymium, praseodymium metals with purities exceeding 99.5%. By December 2024, production had ramped to 40 tons per. The target: 400 tons per year by early 2025, enough to manufacture magnets for 500,000 electric vehicles. But here's what matters more than the numbers. In December 2025, the Saskatchewan Research Council signed an agreement with Realloys, an American company that supplies rare earth magnets to U.S. defense contractors. The deal includes a 5-year offtake agreement. Realloys will purchase the vast majority of the facility's output. That output will go directly into America's defense supply chain. The agreement aims for 500 tons of magnets by 2026, 1,000 tons by 2028. And there's more. The two parties are conducting a feasibility study for a large-scale rare earth processing complex, one of the largest in the world, right there in Saskatoon. Let me be clear about what this means. When China restricted rare earth exports, America's only viable alternative, the only commercial-scale facility in North America capable of producing defense-grade rare earth metals, was in Canada. Not California, not Texas, Saskatchewan. The Center for Strategic and International Studies, one of Washington's most respected think tanks, published an analysis in 2025 with a title that tells you everything: Canada may be the United States' best hope for mineral security. Not maybe in the future, maybe right now, but rare earths are just one resource. Let's talk about uranium. The United States operates 93 nuclear reactors. They provide about 19% of America's electricity, the largest source of carbon-free power in the country. And those reactors need fuel. In 2022, 27% of uranium purchased by American nuclear reactors came from one country: Canada. That makes Canada the largest foreign supplier of uranium to the United States. Now, you might say, 27% isn't that much, but consider who else is on that list: Russia, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, countries that are either adversaries or aligned with adversaries. In May 2024, the United States banned imports of Russian uranium. They included waivers through 2028, but the direction is clear. America needs to reduce dependence on Russian nuclear fuel. Where does that leave them? Canada has the 3rd largest uranium reserves in the world. Canadian deposits have grades up to 100 times the global average. All active Canadian uranium mines are in Saskatchewan, the same province producing rare earths. And here's the strategic reality. If America wants to expand nuclear power, and they do, for both climate goals and to power the data centers running artificial intelligence, they need uranium from stable allied nations. The list of stable allied nations with significant uranium production is very short. Canada is at the top. Now let's talk about something that most people don't think about until it's gone: food. Potash is a mineral used in fertilizer. It provides potassium, one of 3 essential nutrients that plants need to grow. Without potash, crop yields collapse, soil becomes depleted, food production declines. Canada has the largest potash reserves in the world, 1.1 billion tons, 5 times larger than American reserves. Canada is the world's largest producer and exporter of potash. In 2024, Canada shipped nearly 23 million tons, 39% of global exports. And here's the number that matters for America. 81% of potash imported into the United States comes from Canada. 81%. The next largest supplier, Russia, which is sanctioned, and Belarus, which is also sanctioned. When Trump threatened 25% tariffs on Canadian goods in early 2025, American farmers panicked. The U.S. prices paid index for fertilizer costs rose 11% by June. Farm groups lobbied Washington directly. The tariff on potash was eventually reduced to 10% after what industry sources called mounting pressure. Why? Because there is no alternative. You cannot replace Canadian potash with domestic production. American potash output is 36 times smaller than Canadian output. The infrastructure doesn't exist. The reserves aren't there. Tariff Canadian potash, and American farmers pay more, American consumers pay more, American food security weakens, and Canada knows this. One fertilizer industry analyst put it plainly, the problem is, if we start to upset Canada, where else around the world do you start to go? To our second biggest supplier? That's Russia. That's the choice, Canada or Russia. Those are your options. Now add it all together. Oil, 4.2 million barrels per day, 60% of American crude imports. Electricity, transmission lines connecting Canadian hydropower to American cities, infrastructure that cannot be rebuilt quickly or cheaply. Rare earths, the only commercial scale processing facility in North America, supplying American defense contractors. Uranium, the largest foreign supplier to American nuclear reactors, critical for energy security and the AI boom. Potash, 81% of American imports, essential for food. Production. This isn't a trade relationship, this is an integrated economy. These are supply chains that were built over decades, optimized over generations, embedded into the physical infrastructure of both countries. You can tariff a car, you can tariff a television, you can tariff lumber and steel and aluminum, but you cannot tariff geography. You cannot tariff the pipeline that already exists. You cannot tariff the transmission line that already connects. You cannot tariff the mine that produces the minerals your fighter jets need to fly. Trump won a press conference when Carney backed down. He got the headline. But headlines don't power cities. Headlines don't fuel refineries. Headlines don't grow crops. Headlines don't build missiles. Resources do. And right now, at this moment, the most critical resources America needs come from the country its president just called the 51st state. Canada didn't lose the trade war. Canada stopped fighting the battle Trump wanted and started positioning for the war they're actually built to win. So what is Canada actually doing while the world watches headlines? 3 weeks ago, Mark Carney stood at Davos, the World Economic Forum, the room where global power brokers gather every year, and he said something that most people missed. A country that cannot feed itself, fuel itself, or defend itself has few options. When the rules no longer protect you, you must protect yourself. He was talking about Canada, but he was really talking about America. Because here's what Carney understands that Trump doesn't. Canada can feed itself. Canada can fuel itself. And Canada is building the capacity to defend itself. America imports 81% of its potash from Canada. America imports 60% of its crude oil from Canada. America's only commercial-scale rare earth processing facility is in Saskatchewan. Carney told Davos that Canada was building strategic autonomy in energy, food, critical minerals, finance, and supply chains. He said the old assumptions that geography and alliances automatically meant prosperity and security, those assumptions are no longer valid. And then he laid out what Canada has been doing, quietly, while the headlines focused on tariffs and insults. Since taking office, Carney's government has signed 12 trade and security deals across 4 continents in 6 months, a comprehensive strategic partnership with the European Union, new agreements with China and Qatar, negotiations underway with India, ASEAN, Thailand, the Philippines, and Mercosur. Canada isn't just diversifying. Canada is building a web of relationships that don't depend on America. And there's more. Canada committed to doubling defense spending. Not because Trump demanded it, because a country with its own military capacity has more negotiating power than one that depends on American protection. Canada is fast-tracking $1 trillion of investment in energy, artificial intelligence, critical minerals, and new trade corridors. Canada isn't folding. Canada is repositioning. And here's what you need to understand about Mark Carney. He spent 13 years at Goldman Sachs. He was governor of the Bank of Canada during the 2008 financial crisis. And Canada was one of the only G7 economies that didn't require a bank bailout. Then he became governor of the Bank of England, the first foreigner to hold that position in its 300-year history. This is not a politician who stumbled into power. This is a man who spent his entire career understanding leverage, risk management, and negotiation at the highest levels. At Davos, Carney received a standing ovation, something almost unheard of at that gathering. Bob Rae, Canada's former ambassador to the United Nations, said he had never seen a global reaction to a speech like Carney's. The next day, Trump responded. He said, "Canada lives because of the United States. They should be grateful." Then he revoked Carney's invitation to his Board of Peace. And Carney? Carney had already left Davos. He flew to Quebec City and gave a national address where he continued to assert Canada's independence. He didn't apologize. He didn't back down. He kept building. That's the pattern. Fold on the battles that don't matter. Win the war that does. July 2026. That's when CUSMA comes up for review. The trade agreement that governs everything between the United States, Mexico, and Canada. That's when the real negotiation begins. Not tweets, not tariffs. The actual terms of the relationship for the next decade. And when that moment comes, Canada will walk into the room with leverage that no headline can erase. Rare earths America needs for fighter jets, oil America needs for refineries, uranium America needs for reactors, potash America needs for farms, electricity America needs for cities. Trump can call Canada the 51st state, he can threaten 100% tariffs, he can insult Carney on social media, but when the lights need to stay on, when the missiles need magnets, when the crops need fertilizer, America will pick up the phone and Canada will answer for a price. So let me bring this back to where we started. What would happen if Canada turned off the lights? The answer is they don't have to, because the threat is enough. The leverage exists whether or not it's used. The pipelines are connected. The transmission lines are humming. The mines are producing. The resources are flowing. Trump's tariffs got the headlines. Carney's retreat got the clicks. But Canada didn't lose the trade war. They stopped fighting the battle Trump wanted and started fighting the war they're built to win. At Davos, Carney said something else, something that explains everything. Nostalgia is not a strategy. He wasn't talking about Canada's past. He was talking about America's. The idea that the old rules still apply, that allies will always comply, that threats will always work. Canada has moved on. Canada is building something new. And America? America is still trapped. You can tariff a country, you can insult its leader, you can call it the 51st state, but you cannot tariff geography. And you cannot escape the neighbor who controls what you need to survive. Trump won a press conference. Canada won the map.